Mozartstraße 25, Linz. Outwardly an inconspicuous building, like many in the quiet streets of this Austrian city. Exactly here, on the top floor, was the studio of Leo Aigner, a 27-year-old young man whose name was known far beyond the borders of Linz. Leo worked as a model, and his face adorned advertising posters and magazines. But 18 days ago, Leo suddenly disappeared. When the police broke down the studio door, they were presented with a picture that had obviously not been prepared by chance. The room was completely lined with transparent vapor barrier film. From floor to ceiling, the film covered walls, windows and doors. Even the air here seemed frozen and filled with a heavy, acrid smell. A portable gas analyzer used by crime technicians registered a hydrogen sulfide concentration of 90 parts per million, a value that testified to an intentional and carefully prepared action. In the center of the room was Leo himself. The condition in which he was found shocked even experienced investigators. Face and hands were severely damaged by acid, as if someone had intentionally wanted to erase his individuality, transform Leo into someone who could not be recognized. The police immediately blocked access to the studio, understanding someone had very carefully covered their tracks, and in such a way that the place should find its owner almost 3 weeks after his disappearance. The investigation established that the last activity of Leo's phone was registered by the base station on the same street, Mozartstraße, at 22:14, exactly 18 days earlier. Since then, the device had been switched off and gave no signs of life. Neighbors later remembered that on the night of the 18th of September, a persistent, monotonous noise of a working compressor penetrated through the building. In addition, some residents noticed a strange smell in the stairwell similar to a solvent. At the time of Leo's disappearance that evening, it was raining heavily outside. But Leo's jacket, which was found in the studio, was completely dry. This meant he had not left the building several hours before his disappearance. At least had not gone outside. A more detailed examination of the room provided investigators with an additional clue. On a glass ashtray, a fingerprint was discovered that obviously belonged neither to Leo nor to anyone from his immediate circle. Only a single print. But it could belong to anyone who had been in contact with Leo Aigner at least once in recent weeks. In the first phases of the investigation, 2 people emerged at the police who aroused particular interest. David Schober, a neighbor and makeup artist whose apartment was literally behind the wall from Leo's studio. David claimed to have seen Leo about 3 weeks ago for the last time, when he looked agitated and was hurrying somewhere. Schober spoke calmly, almost casually. His words sounded truthful but too general without the possibility of checking details. Another important witness was Max Hulzel, manager of a large modeling agency from Vienna. He assured investigators that Leo had flown to a casting in Milan and should return from day to day. Max was not worried about his protégé's fate and explained his disappearance with a simple misunderstanding or delay in affairs. However, this version began to crumble almost immediately. Investigators checked the call list and saw that Max had called Leo 3 times on the night of his disappearance. It seemed strange that a person who claimed the model had flown to Italy was calling him as if he didn't know where he was. In addition, neither airports nor border control confirmed Leo's departure from Austria in the specified period. Soon it became clear that the story about Milan had been invented by someone to confuse the police. The last fact that emerged and turned the whole situation upside down appeared only in the evening, when crime technicians carefully checked every object belonging to Leo. On the nightstand, they found a sleep mask. In the forensic laboratory, traces of chloroform were discovered on it, a substance that could only be obtained in pharmacies with a special prescription. And it obviously did not belong to Leo Aigner. The forensic chemist quickly identified the batch of the preparation. Pharmacy marking 21,4187 AT, which made it possible to trace the buyer. It became obvious that Leo had been put to sleep directly in his own studio before his disappearance. Someone had come to him with an already prepared substance, had carefully prepared the room, and consciously created a situation in which the police would not be able to encounter the true criminal for a long time. Thus, at the end of the first investigation phase, all versions came down to two suspects: David Schober, the quiet neighbor and makeup artist, and Max Hölzel, the agency manager who obviously tried to distract police attention with the legend about the Milan trip. The police had to find out who exactly had decided to radically correct Leo's appearance and what the true reason was for such a cruel act. With each hour, the investigations dove deeper into hidden motives and carefully disguised actions of a person who very much wanted to remain unnoticed. The story about Leo's flight to Milan gradually crumbled to dust. It was clear to investigators that someone from Leo's circle had consciously misled the police. But how could the myth about the trip become so convincing for many? The investigators' work began with questioning those close to him. Leo's parents, Maria and Thomas Aigner, showed correspondence with their son. From the chats, it became clear that Leo had changed his plans a day before his disappearance. He informed his mother that the trip is not taking place, without explaining the reasons for the cancellation. For Maria, the message looked ordinary and aroused no concern. In the modeling business, such postponements were regular. However, Leo never officially cancelled the flight. Upon inquiry with Austrian Airlines, crime technicians discovered a flight booking in his name. But a strange detail emerged. The ticket had been paid for with a virtual bank card that provided no real debit. This discovery meant only one thing. The ticket had been issued exclusively to leave a digital trace, to create the appearance of a trip being prepared. Investigators returned to Max Hölzel, Leo's manager, and demanded an explanation for why he continued to confidently claim that his protégé had left Austria and traveled to Milan, although the airport officially denied any data about Leo's departure. Max Hölzel reacted calmly, almost indifferently, and repeated his version of events. According to his words, he was simply repeating Leo's own words. Max assured investigators that he had not personally verified the departure data but had trusted his employees' professionalism. This sounded logical but suspiciously convenient, and investigators continued searching for more substantial confirmations. With permission from the Linz District Court, a search was conducted in Max Hölzel's modeling agency office in Vienna. Among the documents and correspondence, law enforcement officers found a file named Milan_casting_Leo.pdf. Outwardly, it looked completely ordinary. Official agency letterhead, standard points about dates and location of casting conduct, as well as the logo of the brand that allegedly organized the event. Upon closer examination, it turned out that such a brand did not exist at all. The document proved to be an artful forgery, obviously intended to convince Leo of the offer's authenticity. This was an open and intentional false trail that required explanations. However, the most amazing thing turned out later, as a result of checking Max's own movements. It turned out that Max could not physically have been in Linz after 18 o'clock on the night of Leo's disappearance. Official data from Prague Airport Passport Control confirmed his entry into the Czech Republic at 22:35. The authenticity of the stamp and entry in the border journal raised no doubts. Exactly on the 18th of September, 21 minutes after Leo's phone stopped sending signals, Max crossed the border between Austria and the Czech Republic. Time and distance were checked and confirmed to the minute. Max used the Eurocity train 176, which covered 280 kilometers in 3 hours 40 minutes. The electronic ticket had been bought in advance, which eliminated any suspicion of spontaneity or attempts at a false alibi. Thus, despite the dubious file and initial suspicions, Max Hölzel received a reliable and irrefutable alibi that excluded his presence in Linz at the time of Leo Aigner's disappearance. Now the circle of suspects narrowed to one person: David Schober, the neighbor and makeup artist who apparently knew much more than he told the police. While the investigations dealt with Max's agency, Schober remained calm and didn't try to draw attention to himself. But now the investigators decided to focus completely on him. The examination of Leo's correspondence with neighbors showed that relations with David were anything but ideal, and some messages even showed signs of hidden conflict. By the end of the day, it became obvious. The version about the casting had been a carefully planned maneuver aimed at diverting attention. And although Max proved to be innocent of the crime itself, he still could not explain to the investigators who exactly had sent him the fabricated task and why someone had to mislead Leo. The police focused again on Leo's environment in Linz. It became clear that the real threat lurked much closer than originally assumed, and each new step brought the investigators closer to the solution. A turning point occurred in the investigations. The investigators began an in-depth examination of David Schober's life and activity. The detectives' attention was drawn to an unusual detail. 4 days before Leo's disappearance, Schober suddenly filed a REACH license for acquiring hydrofluoric acid. A strange choice for a person who worked professionally with makeup artistry and had never dealt with chemicals of this class. The police officers conducted a search in David's apartment and discovered objects there that finally convinced them of the necessity of further interrogations. In the living room, between cosmetics and professional makeup equipment, the investigators found an empty glass bottle of chloroform. The expert group immediately determined that the bottle came from the same pharmacy batch 21-4187 that had been discovered on Leo Aigner's sleep mask. A coincidence was excluded, and the investigations had direct proof of Schober's connection to Leo's disappearance. Additionally, delivery receipts from the company CHEM Logistics from the city of Traun were found in the hallway. The documents confirmed receipt of a batch of reagents, 11 kilograms of 40% hydrofluoric acid and 5 kilograms of concentrated sulfuric acid. The delivery receipt was signed by David Schober himself and dated the 19th of September, only 1 day after Leo stopped responding. The chronology clearly indicated an operation prepared in advance. In the interrogation room, Schober appeared composed, even somewhat irritated by the investigators' attention to his life. To the investigators' question about why a professional makeup artist needed such aggressive and dangerous acid, David quickly and confidently expressed his version. According to his words, he planned to use the acid to clean old photographic cassettes that had become covered with oxides over time. However, the investigators carefully examined Schober's apartment and discovered neither a single photographic cassette nor special Teflon dishes necessary for working with HF. Criminal experts confirmed that without special equipment, using such acid was practically impossible and extremely dangerous. David's legend began to crumble. However, when the accusations against Schober seemed absolutely convincing, the forensic technicians shared yet another unexpected fact. On one of the canisters with acid, a second DNA trace was discovered. Criminal experts confirmed that the found DNA belonged to an unknown person who had not previously figured in the case materials. Checking in Austria's police databases yielded no matches. This unknown trace became a serious puzzle. A third participant in the story whose identity the investigations still had to establish. For now, this fact was noted by the investigators as promising but not fully clarified. Simultaneously, the forensic expert who examined the effects on Leo Aigner shared new, shocking details. Analysis of the biological remains confirmed that before applying the acid, another impact had occurred. Using local thermometric analysis of tissues, it was determined that Leo had been subjected to heating to about 65 degrees Celsius. This unusual discovery led the forensic technicians to think about possible motives. Perhaps the heating had been part of a procedure that had a completely different purpose than just destroying Leo's appearance. For now, the purpose of this impact remained unclear, but obviously testified to the thoughtfulness and care of the guilty person's actions. The investigators finally came close to solving the puzzle of the unknown DNA and the unusual heating discovered by court experts. David Schober already understood that evidence was accumulating against him, but continued to insist on his innocence. Meanwhile, the forensic technicians began a repeated, more careful examination of the ventilation system of the house on Mozart Street. Inside the ventilation duct, an unexpected clue was found. A homemade filter of class F7, completely atypical for domestic conditions. Microscopic examination of the filter revealed small fibers and microparticles of cosmetic makeup. In the laboratory, spectral analysis was conducted that confirmed complete correspondence of the cosmetic composition with professional makeup artist David Schober's set found in his apartment. Obviously, the filter had been specially installed to retain certain specific particles that entered the air during preparation or execution of the crime. Parallel to this, the laboratory finally established the identity of the third participant, the owner of the unknown DNA found on the canister with acid. The owner turned out to be Eva Meyer, Schober's former assistant and his colleague working in the makeup salon. She approached the police herself after learning about the investigations from the news and deciding to make voluntary statements. In interrogation, Eva explained her appearance in the case simply. She had passed empty canisters to David for subsequent recycling, which was usual practice for her. Checking her words and actions by the investigation group gave no reason to doubt her version. Thus, the third DNA stopped being a puzzle for the investigations, and Eva Meyer's person no longer aroused suspicions. However, the question of Leo's thermal treatment remained open and complicated. The investigation group brought in leading specialists from the Vienna Institute of Forensic Medicine to clarify this moment to the end. The experts presented two possible versions. The first stated that the heating could have been part of a thought-out plan for preliminary dehydration and so-called mummification of the remains. Such an approach could have had the goal of significantly complicating identification of the person after acid exposure. The second version was more practical and less exotic. The experts suspected that Schober used heat to pre-dry the polyethylene layer that lined the room. This way, chemical vapors would be retained in the room significantly longer, and their effect would be more effective and devastating. This hypothesis looked quite justified from a technical standpoint and was perceived by the investigations as the most realistic. Meanwhile, the media began actively discussing Eva Meyer's complicity, whose DNA had been discovered on the canisters. The media, seeking to find a sensation, almost tried to present her as a second suspect. The police were forced to officially verify her alibi. Interrogations and recording analysis showed that Eva was conducting a makeup artistry masterclass at a large vocational school exactly on the day of the crime. The entire event was broadcast online and recorded on the school's internal video surveillance system, which fully corresponded to the security standards of 2023. The video was carefully checked by investigators, and Eva's presence at the event was documentarily confirmed and notarially certified. The false trail was officially closed, and Meyer was completely excluded from the list of suspects. However, before the investigators could finally formulate charges against David Schober, the police technical group conducted an in-depth analysis of electronic devices confiscated during the search of his apartment. Special attention was drawn to a laptop in whose cache a very strange search query in English was discovered. Blind with acid, but alive. The metadata of this query was damaged, and the exact date of its execution could not be restored. Nevertheless, the fact of such a search was documentarily recorded and became proof of conscious intent. This indicated an even more cruel original plan that possibly had not been fully implemented. Now the investigations finally concentrated on connecting Schober's motive with the chronology of the crime. Understanding that all previously unclear details had concrete and clearly thought-out purpose, David Schober could no longer hope for coincidences or matches in a case that unfolded before the investigators as a pre-planned, cold and cruel operation against Leo Aigner. 3 months after the discovery of Leo Aigner, the investigations approached their end. The investigators already had a complete picture of the crime details and the motives of the person who organized one of the cruelest cases of recent years. All evidence collected by the police pointed directly and indisputably to David Schober, Leo's neighbor and professional makeup artist. His crime proved to be a carefully planned and cruel act, caused not only by envy but also by deeply hidden personal dislike. On the night of the disappearance, on the 18th of September around 21:30, David Schober invited Leo to his home and suggested an unusual idea for a nighttime photo shoot. Leo trusted him without even suspecting any deception. Already in the apartment, David handed him a sleep mask that was soaked with chloroform. From that moment on, Leo could neither resist nor change anything. Shortly after the neighbor's disappearance, David received delivery of the acids ordered in advance. The investigations became finally convinced of his guilt after studying the documents. The reach, license, and delivery receipts from the company Kame Logistics became iron proof that Schober had consciously prepared for the crime. The fingerprint on the ashtray that had been discovered on the first day of crime scene investigation also belonged to Schober, and finally refuted his words that he had not been at Leo's for several weeks. The investigations also completely refuted all of Schober's attempts to provide himself with an alibi. After Leo's phone had lost connection exactly in his apartment, David's digital traces confirmed that he had not left Linz for a minute from the 18th of September, including transactions with his bank card and data from customer cards of local stores. The last drop in the chain of evidence was the analysis of Schober's laptop. Exactly there, the search query "blind with acid but alive" was found. Experts considered this query not only confirmation of the intention to disfigure Leo, but also proof of the entire depth of David Schober's pathological condition. His main goal had been to forever destroy the beauty and success of the one he perceived as a personal rival, also out of jealousy toward his former colleague and assistant, Eva Mayer. When the investigations had collected all evidence and organized a confrontation, David Schober initially said not a word and ignored questions and accusations directed at him. But as soon as all evidence was presented to him, including fingerprints, documents for acids, movement data, and digital traces on his laptop, he changed dramatically. In desperation, David grabbed a pen from the table and tried to inflict injuries on himself directly in front of the investigators. The security team was able to prevent his actions in time, but for those present in the hall, this was the final confirmation of his guilt. On the 25th of November 2024, the final hearing in case number 271/23 took place at the Regional Court of Linz, which was conducted under the tense attention of the press and public. The court found no mitigating circumstances. Based on Article 75 and Article 176 of the Austrian Criminal Code, David Schober was found guilty on all counts of the charges brought. The verdict sounded brief and categorical: life imprisonment. After the verdict was announced, the investigation materials were sent to the archive of the State Criminal Police of Upper Austria under the official index LKA00 number 271/23. The case was definitively closed. Leo Aigner, a talented young man who became a victim of someone else's pathological jealousy and envy, became a sad example of how dangerous hidden emotions can be. His name remained in the memory of friends and loved ones as a symbol of a bright life that was cruelly interrupted by a merciless crime. Time put everything in its place. Justice was restored, the guilty party was punished, and society received a cruel lesson about how important it is to notice hidden signs of an approaching tragedy in time. The police came to a warehouse after an ordinary call. Workers had found an old, rusty barrel from which a heavy smell emanated. It was even eerie to open it. No one suspected that it would contain the key to a 5-year-old secret. At 9:45 in the morning, on the 10th of May 2023, an ordinary workday in the Beira Rio industrial area was interrupted by a call to the police. Warehouse number 17, which stood deep in a grey district, was intended for storing construction and industrial equipment. The last scheduled inventory had taken place here almost 2 years ago. Since then, some of the stored items had been written off and forgotten. On this day, workers were preparing to clear the warehouse to make room for a new delivery of equipment. Amid a pile of metal and old parts, someone noticed a metal barrel. It stood separately at the edge, half covered by a layer of dust and rust. At first, no one paid special attention to it. But when the workers tried to move the barrel with a forklift, an unpleasant smell noticeably emerged from under the lid. Police officers and crime technicians quickly arrived at the scene. The examination of the barrel took only a few minutes. It was an industrial container for 200 liters. At the bottom seam, there was a barely visible manufacturer's marking. Production, year 2018. Carefully, the crime technicians illuminated the area around the lid with a flashlight and confirmed the suspicion. Inside there was obviously something that had been lying here for more than a year. When the barrel's lid was carefully opened, it was immediately clear. The experts were dealing with a serious criminal find. Inside, human remains were discovered, partially covered with lime and mixed with thick old motor oil. It was obvious that someone had tried to hide any signs of who was inside and how long the remains had been lying here. The first examination of the crime scene yielded little, but it was important information. The surveillance cameras in the warehouse proved useless. Archives older than 2 years were automatically overwritten. The warehouse itself did not keep particularly careful records of who brought what cargo here when. However, under the garbage and industrial waste, not far from the barrel, a label from the shipping company, Auto Cargo, was found, on which the registration number of a delivery van was partially preserved. This was the first concrete evidence. Questioning the warehouse employees brought another strange coincidence to light. The security guard, Yuan Correa, who had worked here since 2017, immediately explained that he had seen this very barrel for many years. It had never attracted special attention, and he thought it contained ordinary waste. When asked exactly when the barrel had appeared in the warehouse, Correa answered uncertainly that it had been about 5 years ago, maybe a little earlier. The investigator asked Correa to clarify his memories. The guard remembered an incident in the year 2020, about 2 years after the presumed date of the barrel's appearance in the warehouse. On this day, a white delivery van with a load of building materials drove onto the premises. The driver, a young man with a short beard, lean and not very talkative, unloaded several boxes in a large metal barrel. Correa suspected that it was the same container, but he was not completely sure. The investigator noted this information, but internally already considered it of little use. According to the dating indicated on the barrel's seam and the external condition of the container, it was clear. The barrel had appeared here earlier than Correa had described. But the version with the unknown bearded driver and the white delivery van was officially noted and remained as the first preliminary suspicion. An urgent DNA analysis of the remains was ordered. For the police, this was a usual procedure, but the waiting time stretched over almost 5 hours. At 16:25 on the same day, an unexpected answer came from the laboratory. The DNA was compared with the database for missing persons. The identity was clearly established. Inside the barrel were the remains of 27-year-old Sofia Alves, who had disappeared on the 16th of April 2018. Her case had been kept as open, but had long since disappeared into police archives and become one of those that were never solved. Now the situation changed abruptly. What had begun as an ordinary call became the key episode of a years-long mystery. The police retrieved the files of the Sofia Alves case and began a new phase of investigations, holding real evidence in this case for the first time. So far, the investigators did not know who exactly the driver of the white delivery van was, and whether he had a direct relationship to what happened. The person who actually placed Sofia in the barrel also remained unknown. Officially, the police declared that the first and most important task was to identify the owner of the delivery van based on the label from the shipping company, Auto Cargo. From this moment on, each next step could bring the investigators closer to solving the mystery that had lived for 5 years in an old, rusty barrel. 2 days after the discovery in the warehouse, the police entered the active phase of investigations. At the top of the suspect list was Sofia's former partner, Tiago Martins. Their relationship had officially ended 3 months before Sofia's disappearance. But after her disappearance, Tiago publicly showed grief and even participated in search actions. To the police, he seemed like a man who had experienced a tragedy, but not like a criminal. But the new discovery changed the investigation approach. When checking Tiago's financial transactions from the time of Sofia's disappearance, the police came across a strange detail. In a bank statement, a payment was noted from the 17th of April 2018, literally the day after Sofia's disappearance. The payment was made at the hardware store Construção Lisboa. In the item description, it clearly stated, Barrel 200L, article number 327, amount €109. The investigators immediately requested the receipt from the store. The result came after a few hours. The batch serial number indicated on the receipt matched perfectly with the marking of the barrel from warehouse number 17. This was an indisputable fact that confirmed that Martins had acquired the barrel. It was the first serious evidence that directly connected Tiago to the discovery site. The police questioned Tiago the next day. He seemed calm, almost indifferent. When asked why he needed an industrial barrel directly after Sofia's disappearance, Martins presented an old bill without hesitation. According to this, the barrel was allegedly bought to store diesel fuel, since he owned a Fiat Ducato delivery van and was planning longer trips. At first, this sounded logical. However, the police did not rely on the suspect's words and conducted an additional check. Martin's old delivery van was found almost immediately. It had already been sold in 2019 through a used car website. When examining the vehicle, it turned out that it had been modified. The fuel tank volume had been almost doubled in a handmade way. The experts clearly stated in their assessment, an additional container for storing diesel fuel in the form of an industrial barrel was not necessary for the owner. The suspect's alibi wavered for the first time. An obvious contradiction arose. Tiago had clearly lied when explaining the purpose of the purchase. That same evening, the police received an unexpected statement that prompted them to examine the suspect's personality even more closely. Miguel Sousa, Martin's neighbor and colleague in small repair work, told investigators that Tiago on that day, the 17th of April 2018, had bought not one, but two metal barrels. Sousa assured that Martins had given him one of them, and the neighbor had seen exactly this one in his garage until 2020. Miguel's statement sounded sincere and convincing. But immediately a new puzzle emerged. If Sousa really had owned a barrel, where was this second container now? A check of Miguel's garage revealed nothing for the time being. Traces of the barrel or diesel fuel were not found on site. Sousa proved to be of good character. The version of the second barrel hung in the air and remained unsolved. The investigations continued meanwhile. On the 13th of May, 2023, the police received court permission to search Tiago Martins' apartment in the old Alfama district. The small and tidy apartment immediately raised doubts among the crime technicians. An initial inspection revealed nothing unusual. But when the experts removed a small part of the laminate in the hallway, the picture changed abruptly. Under the flooring, in the joints and at the edges of the old screed, microscopic blood traces were found. A quick analysis confirmed the police's worst fears. The traces found belonged to Sofia Alves. This was the second, and already extremely serious evidence that clearly indicated a connection between Martins and the girl's disappearance. After this discovery, Tiago lost his composure. He fell silent and refused to continue speaking without a lawyer. The police decided to temporarily halt the interrogation in order not to frighten the suspect and to await the results of the complete examination of the floor in the apartment. The volume and exact age of the traces found still had to be confirmed. If the blood was left exactly on the day of Sofia's disappearance, further justifications from the suspect would become impossible. While the investigation was in full swing, the investigators returned once again to Tiago's financial and personal connections. Sofia's former partner no longer seemed to be the person he had previously been seen as. grieving and compassionate. On the contrary, more and more contradictions appeared in his words and actions, more and more oddities that no one had noticed before. However, the question of the second barrel remained open. Despite Miguel Sousa's statement, the police did not rush to final conclusions. So far, it was not even clear whether the second barrel existed at all. And if so, why had no one except Martin's neighbor seen it? The investigation returned once again to examining documents and records in order not to overlook a single detail that could shed light on the events of 5 years ago. The moments of suspicion thickened around the figure of Tiago Martins, a man who apparently was skilled at hiding the truth even from the closest people. Almost a week after the investigators' attention had focused on the person of Tiago Martins, the police expanded the circle of searching for answers and turned to Sofia Alves' family. In the original investigation 5 years ago, her family had not been included in the list of suspects and acted exclusively as the injured party. Now, for the first time, their financial transactions were carefully examined. It was precisely the financial side of Sofia's life that suddenly revealed unexpected details. When analyzing Sofia's banking activities, the investigators discovered a large transaction. 14,000 euros in cash had been withdrawn from her account literally 1 day before her disappearance, on the 15th of April, 2018. This detail had previously for some reason attracted no attention, and now the investigators decided to get to the bottom of the matter. At a personal meeting with Sofia's mother, Carla Alves, the investigators tried to clarify the origin and purpose of this money. Carla, a woman in her early 50s, seemed sincere and reserved, but her answer immediately aroused suspicion. Sofia had no debts. She never borrowed money and owed nothing to anyone. However, the bank documents told a different story. Moreover, it turned out that Carla Alves had received a transfer of 6,000 euros to her account on the same day, the 15th of April. The official purpose was laconically stated as for kitchen renovation. Carla explained without particular emotion that this came from the sale of an old family car that they had allegedly wanted to sell for a long time. There was no hint of excitement in her words, and she calmly confirmed that the money came exactly from this transaction. The investigators checked Carla's words. According to the registration office register, the Alves family had not sold a car either in April 2018 or later. Moreover, the last registered car sale in their family took place 3 years before Sofia's disappearance. The mother's words proved to be a lie. Now the police suspected Carla Alves of hiding important information from the investigators. Assumptions arose that the mother knew far more about her daughter's financial problems than she tried to show. One of the initial versions of the investigation was the assumption that Carla might have known about blackmail by her daughter's former partner, Tiago Martins. The investigators began to suspect that this money might have been part of a ransom or an attempt to resolve a conflict that the family preferred not to talk about. The version seemed convincing for exactly as long as it took the police to examine the second part of Sofia's bank documents. Among old financial statements, a much stranger detail was found. It turned out that Sofia had actually received a large sum of cash, not from the bank, but from a private financial company called LX Capital. The amount matched exactly 14,000 euros. The investigators requested additional information about the company. The firm, registered as a private lender, had not previously come under police scrutiny. The official owner of the company was a man named Antonio Fernandez, about whom there was practically no information in police databases, except that he kept in the background and was not active in public. The fact that Sofia might have turned to a private lender changed the perception of the case radically. The money no longer seemed to be just simple help for the family or an innocent purchase. Instead, a dangerous version emerged that Sofia might have been involved in a financial transaction that led to far greater misfortune for her. A check of contacts and conversation records revealed that Sofia had indeed contacted the office of LX Capital shortly before her disappearance. Phone data confirmed that the last meeting with a company representative had taken place 3 days before the girl disappeared. During a renewed questioning of Carla Alves, the police asked her directly whether she knew anything about her daughter's financial problems and about the company LX Capital. Carla categorically denied any knowledge and continued to insist on her original version of the car sale. However, this story now seemed finally incredible, and the police noted Carla's lie as a fact requiring further clarification. Nevertheless, law enforcement decided not to make hasty accusations against her and instead focused on investigating the figure of the mysterious Antonio Fernandez. His role in all these events remained unclear for now. It was only obvious that Sofia had somehow gotten into a situation with significant financial risk, that the family was aware of this and was trying to hide it. Only the question remained: why? The police began carefully checking possible connections between the owner of LX Capital, Antonio Fernandez, and the main suspect, Tiago Martins. For now, this was nothing more than an assumption based only on the general logic of events. There was no direct evidence at this point, and the investigation decided to proceed step by step without overlooking a single trace. A week of investigations and endless checks finally brought a result. The forensic technicians carefully extracted and smoothed out a wet, almost destroyed fragment of the autocargo label found next to the barrel in warehouse number 17. When the paper dried and went through a special scan, the experts could decipher a barely readable stamp. Driver ID number 58G72. This detail proved crucial for the investigation. The specialists of the investigation department immediately requested information from the autocargo company database. Half an hour later came the response containing the identity of the driver assigned to the specified ID. It was 33-year-old Diogo Silva, a temporary driver who had worked for the company for only a few months in 2018. Silva's status immediately changed to new witness. Diogo was summoned for questioning that same day. He seemed confused, but calm. In the presence of his lawyer, Silva told the investigators that in April 2018 he regularly transported various freight and construction waste on behalf of private clients. The driver only reluctantly remembered specific details from that time, claiming not to remember faces or special characteristics of the clients. It had been his normal work. Silva did not deny the possibility that his van might have been near warehouse number 17, but at the same time emphasized that he had not left anything suspicious in the warehouse, certainly no barrels. The police did not rush to take his word for it. The same day, after obtaining a search warrant, the investigators requested GPS navigation data installed in the autocargo service vehicle. The system log confirmed Diogo Silva's worst fears. On the 18th of April 2018, his van was indeed on the premises of warehouse number 17 in the Beira Rio industrial area. The standing time was 17 minutes. According to company rules, this is sufficient for unloading or loading freight. In another conversation, the driver could not explain the reasons for the stop. He insisted on not remembering the details of the day from 5 years ago, but the police noticed an important detail. Silva was working that day without a partner and did not have a standard terminal for load control with him, which violated company regulations. This strengthened police suspicion, as the driver could easily have unloaded anything possible in the warehouse without control. But Silva continued to deny any unlawful actions. His alibi proved to be weak and was based almost exclusively on personal memories. The police had no direct evidence of his involvement in Sofia Alves' disappearance, but also no way to clear him of suspicion. The investigation stood at a crossroads when the next day the Department for Forensic Analysis reported another unexpected message. The experts who had studied the recordings of the city traffic system for the 18th of April 2018 discovered an important fragment of a video recording. It turned out that on the day when Diogo Silva's delivery van drove to warehouse number 17, another vehicle followed him, a white Fiat Ducato. The experts were able to read part of the license plate of this second delivery van, which completely matched the vehicle that had previously belonged to Tiago Martins and had been sold by him in 2019. The appearance of a second vehicle immediately changed the direction of the investigations. It became obvious that there was another unknown participant in the story, whose role was no less significant than Silva's. Now the investigators had to find out whether the drivers of the two delivery vans knew each other and whether they acted together, or whether one was following the other and trying to remain unnoticed. Given the new circumstances, the prosecutor's office immediately issued an order to seize the servers of the city video surveillance system to reconstruct the complete movement profile of both vehicles for the entire 18th of April, 2018. While the police waited for the results of the detailed technical investigation, the investigators again summoned Diogo Silva for questioning to verify his original statements. This time, Silva was noticeably more nervous. The appearance of the second delivery van was a surprise to him, but he continued to insist on his complete innocence and assured that he had never seen the white Fiat Ducato before and had not known anyone with the surname Martins. His lawyer asked to avoid hasty conclusions and reminded that all this was still only circumstantial evidence. The investigators understood that Diogo Silva might only be a random witness or participant in the events, without recognizing the full scope of the situation. His possible involvement remained undetermined, but the investigators were also not in a hurry to completely remove the driver from the list of suspects. There was a possibility that Silva was intentionally concealing part of the information. Now the mystery of the white Fiat Ducato became the key episode of the investigations. The man who sat behind the wheel of this delivery van became one of the most important figures in the entire story. While the police were not in a hurry to name the driver of the second vehicle, suspicions against Sofia's former partner, Tiago Martins, intensified day by day. The forensic technicians were certain of only one thing. The autocargo label had led the investigation to a specific driver and a specific time. Now it was important to understand what exactly happened on that April day near warehouse number 17, and who was the man behind the wheel of the white Fiat Ducato who followed Diogo Silva's delivery van. A week after the police discovered the trail of the second delivery van, the investigation again returned to the person of Miguel Sousa, the neighbor and colleague of Tiago Martins. At first, the investigators had paid little attention to Sousa and considered him a secondary witness. Now his garage was at the center of interest. On the 30th of May, the police conducted a scheduled search in Miguel's garage, which he used as a small repair workshop. Inside, between boxes of tools and cement bags, several pairs of old work gloves were found. They did not look suspicious until one of the experts noticed a thin layer of whitish powder on them. A quick analysis quickly revealed that it was ordinary construction lime, but the police decided to send the gloves for thorough laboratory analysis. Already on the evening of the next day, results came that radically changed Sousa's status. On the inside of one of the gloves, microscopic traces of blood and hair were found that matched Sofia Alves's DNA by 99.8%. Now the police had another suspect. Sousa was arrested for questioning on the evening of the same day. In the first minutes, he seemed shocked and did not hide his surprise at the discovery in his garage. Miguel confidently explained to the investigators that the gloves had been left by Tiago Martins after a repair they had done together several years ago. He claimed to have barely used them himself and had long forgotten that he even owned these gloves. The investigators checked Sousa's words and found out that he had indeed worked together with Martins on a series of projects in the years 2000 and 2017 to 2018. Witnesses and contractors confirmed that the two men often shared tools and building materials, and that did not look suspicious. But the appearance of Sofia's DNA on the gloves automatically made the situation more complicated. The investigators tried to determine whether Sousa could have transported or moved the barrel. According to registration data, Sousa owned a Nissan Vanette minibus until 2020, which was capable of transporting large objects. Theoretically, he could have covered the 12 kilometers to the Beira Rio industrial area and back in half an hour. An important fact was that a surveillance camera was installed in Sousa's garage, but it had already stopped functioning in 2019. The owner had disconnected it himself, explaining this with simple money saving. A check revealed that this was true. Recordings after this period did not exist. It was now impossible to prove or disprove Miguel's words using camera recordings. The investigators understood that the evidence looked contradictory. Sousa claimed to have nothing to do with the barrel and not to know the victim personally. He admitted that Sofia had come to Tiago several times when they were a couple, but he had no direct contact with her. His explanations sounded logical, but the evidence continued to be disturbing. To clear or confirm suspicion against Sousa, the police conducted another check. This time, Miguel's own DNA was used to compare it with the samples found in the gloves. The results were unexpected. An expert opinion from BMRS confirmed that the biological material on the gloves came from Sofia, but completely excluded that the blood or other traces could come from Miguel Sousa himself. Furthermore, not a single one of his fingerprints or skin cells was found inside the gloves, which looked extremely strange. It was clear that the gloves had been worn by another person who had previously put on thin, protective inner gloves. This discovery confirmed Sousa's words that he had not worn the gloves himself. But now a new puzzle emerged. Who exactly had worn them, and for what purpose? The identity of this person became the main target of further investigations. At the same time, police experts decided to focus on the origin of the lime on the gloves. This substance had been found both in the barrel from the warehouse and now clearly connected the gloves to the incident from 5 years ago. The laboratory began studying the chemical composition of the lime, hoping to understand where exactly it came from and where it might have been stored previously. Sousa himself remained under observation, but a formal charge was premature for now. The investigation concluded that Miguel's role in the case was probably limited to some kind of mediation, although he possibly did not know the details of what happened between Tiago and Sofia. Now the investigators saw him more as someone who was used by someone else. Meanwhile, the police continued to examine the connections and cooperation between Martins and Sousa, searching for an answer to the main question: how exactly did the gloves with Sofia's biological material end up in the garage of a man who never had direct contact with her? The investigators understood that clarifying this detail could bring them closer to the main answer to the question of what exactly happened to Sofia in April 2018. After a series of events that led investigators to new suspects and evidence, the investigation again turned to the financial side of Sofia Alves' life. It was precisely here that the police found a document that represented a new, serious turn in the case. When examining bank and legal archives, investigators obtained a microcredit contract that Sofia had signed just 1 day before her disappearance on the 15th of April 2018. According to the document, she took out a loan of 20,000 euros from the company LX Capital. The loan conditions were harsh, 28% per year. Much more interesting, however, was the fact that none other than Tiago Martins, Sofia's former partner and main suspect in the case, appeared as guarantor for this loan. This contract became the first concrete evidence of a financial connection between Sofia and Martins after their official separation. Until now, Martins had assured investigators that communication with Sofia after the breakup had been minimal and formal. Now these claims seemed doubtful. During a new interrogation, Tiago Martins again confidently explained that he had provided his signature exclusively from the desire to help his former lover open her own business, a small cafe in the old quarter of the city. After checking Sofia's contacts, police confirmed that the girl had indeed discussed plans to open a cafe with her friends and family, but was obviously uncertain about the business details herself. Investigators carefully examined Sofia's correspondence. Precisely the text messages shed light on the girl's true doubts. 2 days before her disappearance, Sofia was actively searching for a lawyer to consult about the contract conditions with LX Capital. The correspondence clearly showed that the loan conditions had been imposed on her, and Sofia was uncertain whether she could fulfill the financial obligations. The messages were short and nervous, and the last contact with a lawyer took place literally a few hours before her disappearance. Exactly then, a new version emerged. Sofia might have become a victim of her financial obligations. Investigators began seriously considering the assumption that the girl's death could have been advantageous for the owner of the credit company, the mysterious Antonio Fernandez. The assumption of a credit murder was hypothetical and not yet supported by facts, but logical from the perspective of Fernandez's interests, writing off the debt by eliminating the debtor. This version received unexpected confirmation after the police telecommunications department presented an analysis of the phone connection data of Sofia and Tiago Martins. In the call data, a short conversation was found that took place on the night of Sofia's disappearance. Exactly at 0:47 in the night of the 16th of April 2018, Tiago Martins called Antonio Fernandez's number. The conversation lasted only 2 minutes and 8 seconds, but the very fact of this call called into question all previous statements by the suspect. Now the police had solid evidence of a direct connection between Martins and Fernandez. Although Martins stubbornly denied any contact with the owner of LX Capital, the phone records proved the opposite. Tiago was summoned for urgent questioning to explain the nighttime call. He obviously had not expected this question and remained silent for several seconds to collect himself. Then he confidently explained that he could not remember the details of the conversation since 5 years had already passed. Martins insisted that it could have been a coincidence or an accidental call, but investigators noticed his obvious unease. The police, understanding that nothing substantial could be expected from Martins at this moment, immediately requested court approval for phone surveillance of Fernandez. It was clear that precisely the owner of LX Capital might possess the keys to solving Sofia's disappearance. And now, he became the center of the investigation. The version of Fernandez's involvement seemed logical and promising, but so far the investigation had no direct evidence of his guilt. He remained a figure in the shadows, a potential mastermind whose role had not yet been fully clarified. Sofia's financial trail gradually uncovered completely new details of her life that not even her family knew about. Sofia had fallen into a debt trap, and the only person who could have helped her was precisely Tiago. His motive, however, remained questionable. Financial advantage or personal jealousy? Both variants kept investigators' attention, but neither could be fully confirmed so far. Thus, the mystery of the nighttime call became the most important lead for the police. Investigators began preparing a large-scale check of Fernandez's contacts, hoping to uncover connections that had been hidden from police eyes until now. The credit murder remained the main working hypothesis, but investigators still lacked the most important thing: evidence. Against the background of these events, Lisbon police returned once again to the starting point: Sofia's contract and Tiago's signature. Precisely these two people, connected by a financial document, were the key to solving this mysterious and disturbing story that began in distant April 2018. The decisive events of the investigation led police once again to one of the main suspects, Tiago Martins and his old Fiat Ducato van. A few days ago, forensic technicians had discovered important evidence: an SD card from the Fleet Guard system that had been installed by Martins himself back in 2017. Investigators hoped that the card's data would help reconstruct the van's nighttime route and determine where it was during the crucial hours of Sofia's disappearance. Examination of the card confirmed investigators' worst suspicions. On the night of the 18th of April 2018, the Fleet Guard system recorded the van's exact route. At 23:19 in the evening, the Ducato left Campolid Street toward the Beira Rio industrial area. Already at 23:34, the vehicle arrived at warehouse number 17, precisely the warehouse where the barrel with Sofia's remains was found 5 years later. Investigators immediately requested similar data for the second vehicle belonging to Miguel Sousa, a Nissan Vanette. Sousa remained under strict police observation, and his involvement or non-involvement in the events could have completely changed the direction of the investigation. But here, investigators faced disappointment. The GPS system in Sousa's van had been completely shut down back in March 2018. A physical check revealed that the GPS module's fuse had been intentionally removed. This made it impossible to determine the vehicle's exact coordinates at the time of interest to police. During a new interrogation of Sousa, investigators confronted him with this new information and demanded an explanation. Miguel showed them without hesitation old messages from a private chat with Martins. In the correspondence, there was indeed a request from Tiago for help transporting some cement bags. The timing of the message sending coincided with the Ducato's movement time. Sousa insisted that he had wanted to leave later, but Tiago had allegedly withdrawn the request at the last moment. However, in the GPS data and traffic police video recordings, Sousa's Nissan Vanette was not detected at all that night. On no road section leading to the industrial area did his van appear, which raised doubts about Miguel's sincerity in the investigation. A hypothesis emerged that he might have intentionally disabled the GPS and diverted the camera's attention to allow Martin's van unhindered passage to the warehouse. This version sounded convincing, but remained without direct evidence. Police decided not to exclude it definitively, but reclassified Sousa as a witness. The accusations based only on indirect assumptions seemed too shaky. The focus of investigations returned to the Fiat Ducato and Martin's person. Investigators obtained court permission to seize and open his private phone. This time, police efforts were not in vain. In the trash of deleted photos, an image was found that was taken on the 18th of April 2018 at 2:11 in the morning. The photo was taken inside the Ducato and clearly showed a metal barrel identical to the one later found in the warehouse. This photo became the most important find. But who had taken this photo and for what purpose remained unknown. The image's metadata was partially damaged, and police had to send it to forensic technicians for EXIF data recovery. For now, the question of who had taken the photo remained open. Now investigators had firm confirmation that Tiago Martins' Fiat Ducato had been at the crime scene on the night of Sofia's disappearance. This significantly strengthened the suspicions against him, although Martins himself answered all questions dryly and briefly. "I don't remember the details. I don't understand how this image could have gotten onto my phone." The experts continued, analyzing the Ducato's nocturnal route, and noted all its stopping points that the Fleet Guard system recorded. Exactly this system was now the police's most important helper, as it made it possible to create a complete picture of the suspect's actions. The experts did not exclude that there might have been another person in this story whose vehicle was not captured by any camera that night. Possibly it was exactly this person who helped Martins. The investigators did not rush to conclusions. They understood that the situation around Sousa was unclear. So far, they had no direct evidence confirming his involvement in transporting the barrel or covering up traces. However, the investigators also could not completely exclude his involvement. The investigation had progressed considerably. Now the police had not only assumptions but real coordinates, and times that confirmed that exactly Martin's delivery van was near the warehouse on the night when Sofia disappeared. But the main questions still remained in the air, and so far there were no clear answers about the motives and the role of each of those involved. In the coming days, the investigators planned to obtain the restored EXIF data of the photo, hoping to understand who held the phone at the moment of taking the picture and why the image was deleted. The mystery of Tiago Martins' nocturnal journey was approaching its resolution, but remained for now behind a thin veil of uncertainty. On the 25th of June, the investigation had gathered enough evidence to conduct a final search of Tiago Martins' apartment. The main goal was one: to confirm or refute the version of an accidental fall that Martins had put forward in recent days. The police already had preliminary results from the analysis of blood traces under the laminate, but now the forensic technicians received the opportunity to completely examine the flaws in the apartment's hallway. After the laminate was completely removed, the experts came to a conclusion that definitively refuted all previous explanations from the suspect. Under the laminate, a special underlayment was discovered that was completely saturated with blood. An expert assessment revealed a specific fluid volume, no less than 180 milliliters. The forensic examination conducted an analysis of the blood spatter pattern and came to an unambiguous conclusion. The injury was caused by a blow with a blunt object to the head area, with the angle and nature of the stains indicating a vertical capillary projection. Consequently, Martins' version of Sophia's fall was completely excluded. After Martins was presented with the results of the expertise, his behavior changed abruptly. He seemed lost, tense, as if he no longer had convincing answers for the investigators. Tiago literally explained to the investigators, "She really fell and hit herself, I was afraid, and decided to cover up the incident." But the investigators already understood that this was an obvious lie. The forensic medical examiner immediately rejected the possibility of suffering such an injury in an ordinary fall in Martins' presence. The expertise clearly indicated external active impact that occurred with specific force and at a clear angle. At this moment, Tiago again began changing his statements, trying to deflect suspicion from himself and pointing to a third person who was allegedly responsible for the incident. Now he insisted that a certain unknown creditor, whose name he allegedly no longer remembered, had come to his home himself and inflicted violence on Sophia due to her debts. Martins claimed he had only become a witness to a conflict that had allegedly gotten out of control, but the police already understood that this version also could not withstand criticism. In all previous interrogations, Martins had categorically denied personally seeing Sophia's creditor or letting him into his home. The investigation decided to examine the apartment even more thoroughly, and this again brought an unexpected result. Ballistic and chemical analyses showed the presence of special bitumen particles on the laminate panels. These particles matched the composition of the protective layer of the metal barrel that was found in warehouse number 17 with Sophia's remains. This was a new, sensational discovery that radically changed the investigators' conception of what had happened in the apartment. The expertise confirmed. The barrel in which the remains were later found was directly in Martins' apartment at the time of the attack on Sophia. And although the exact circumstances and chronology of events were still unknown, the mere presence of the barrel meant that the crime could not be a simple accident or oversight. The investigators faced the question of transporting this barrel into the apartment and back out. The police understood that it was impossible to carry a large object into and out of a residential building unnoticed. But the neighbors claimed to remember nothing of the sort, and the surveillance cameras at the entrance had also recorded no strange activity that day. It became clear to the investigators that Martins had a carefully thought-out plan whose details still had to be determined. But already now the investigation had everything necessary to begin drafting an official indictment. All of Tiago's attempts to escape responsibility, to change his explanations or shift blame onto a certain creditor failed definitively. Physical evidence, forensic reports, and logical contradictions in his statements left no doubt about Martins' involvement. Meanwhile, the police did not rush to completely exclude the involvement of other persons, such as Sousa or the owner of the credit company, Fernandez. But their roles in what happened were still unclear, and above all, they did not have the same serious confirmation as Martins. The final phase of the investigation was nearing completion. The entire picture of the crime was coming together slowly but inexorably. Tiago Martins barely disputed the facts anymore, although his last line of defense looked more like a desperate attempt to mitigate his own punishment than a real explanation for what happened. At this point, only one unsolved task remained before the investigators: to understand how Martins had managed to transport the barrel so that not a single witness noticed it. This puzzle remained the last unsolved element of the case and was separated into a separate procedure that the investigation wanted to complete in the coming days. Now the Lisbon police officially prepared the documents for transferring the case to court, where Martins would have to explain not to investigators but to the judge and jury why so much evidence pointed to his direct guilt in Sofia Alves's disappearance. On the 4th of March 2024, a trial that had lasted almost 10 months ended in the courtroom of the Lisbon City Court. In the dock, Tiago Martins, found guilty of a serious crime committed 6 years ago. The prosecutor, based on all evidence collected by the investigation, presented to the court in detail the complete picture of events from that April night of 2018. The court heard a chain of evidence in which no ambiguities remained. That night, Sophia came to Martin's apartment with the intention of achieving the cancellation of the guarantee for the loan from LX Capital. A conflict arose between them that quickly escalated into a fight. The matter was complicated by the fact that Sophia, as became known from correspondence, planned not only to free herself from financial obligations, but also to expose the scheme of Martin's fraud with microloans. This would have meant not only his personal bankruptcy, but also inevitable criminal prosecution for Tiago. The investigators definitively established the motive: Martin's fear of exposure, intensified by a feeling of jealousy towards Sophia, who was obviously arranging her life without him. The experts presented an assessment to the court. The injury was inflicted on Sophia in the hallway of Martin's apartment, where at the time of the incident stood a metal industrial barrel that had been purchased a day before the events. The evidence is indisputable. The bitumen particles on the laminate matched the coating of the barrel, and the blood traces completely confirmed the biomechanics of the injury. After everything happened, Martins placed Sophia in that very barrel, doused her with lime and oil, sealed it hermetically, and drove it at 23:34 that night with the Fiat Ducato delivery van to warehouse number 17 in the Beira Rio industrial area. Throughout the entire trial, Martins tried to shift responsibility onto other people. First, he accused Miguel Sousa, who had allegedly helped him cover up the traces. But the court proved Sousa's alibi. That night, he was in Porto, 200 kilometers from the crime scene, which was confirmed by tickets and witness testimony. Sousa was completely acquitted, and his false statements about the second barrel were merely assessed as an attempt to help a friend escape punishment. Another line of prosecution against Antonio Fernandez, the owner of LX Capital, also found no confirmation. The investigators determined that his role was exclusively limited to granting the loan. The contacts with Martins were purely business in nature. The charges against Fernandez were completely dropped, and he remained a figure in the shadow of this case, without legal consequences. During the course of the trial, Martins's lawyer made a last attempt to turn the course of the proceedings by addressing the disappearance of precisely those 20,000 euros that Sophia had received. He even tried to accuse her family of fraud and staging the disappearance, and demanded an additional investigation. The judge called this motion direct manipulation and immediately rejected it. After a brief pause, the judge announced the decision. Tiago Martins is found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 22 years imprisonment in a maximum security prison. The verdict was announced dryly, without emotions and comments, as befits a court. The court established that the investigation had not succeeded in determining the exact time of Sofia Alves's death. The forensic examination yielded only a time frame, from the 16th to the 18th of April 2018. But despite this gap, the main questions were completely clarified. Sofia's identity was confirmed, the circumstances of the crime were revealed in detail, Martin's alibi proved to be a carefully planned lie. Sousa and Fernandez were officially excluded from the case. However, some details of the investigations remained sealed. For example, the missing 20,000 euros that had been transferred to Sofia from the company LX Capital were never found. Bailiffs attempted to gain access to the company's financial accounts, but the operation ran through shell accounts for cash procurement, and the trail was lost. The investigations into this matter were suspended until new information emerges. It was also never clarified who else might have helped Martins cover up traces. The surveillance cameras did not record the movement of the barrel, and witnesses noticed nothing suspicious. This part of the case remained open and awaits new data, should they ever surface. The trial ended exactly at 17 o'clock. Martins was led from the courtroom in handcuffs. He did not look back and said no word. Sofia Alves's family stood up and silently left the courtroom. The court proceedings were closed.